Hey, Plumber Tom here. If you're preparing for a plumbing state test or trying to improve your knowledge of code and understanding of plumbing, don't forget to check in the description below for links to study guides, online courses, and other resources that will help you to learn the code and pass your test. When you click on those links and purchase resources, you're helping me to be able to create more great content. Thanks for watching. NFPA 13D, standard for the installation of sprinkler systems in 1 and 2 family dwellings and manufactured homes. Hello, welcome to this presentation of the NFPA 13D. My name is Thomas and we're still in Chapter 8. We're moving forward, trying to get a good hold on the topic of sprinkler position and location. Let's see what we can learn. Okay, quick helpful hint as you're going through Chapter 8. This is kind of like this disbursement of figures and tables, and they don't line up exactly with the words of the paragraph where they go. So what I did in my book, I'm going to show you here, see if you can have a look. I don't know if you can see all the color that I put into it. I took time to color code it, basically. So it was like, well, this table I circled in with the figure, circled that all orange, so that they're coupled together. There's another table and a figure that are spread out, but I've got them red so that they're coupled together. And that way I can just look at this quickly and be like, okay, this one is here. And then I color-coded that to connect with the text. So the text here has loads of colors, and those refer me over to the tables and figures. Look, if you take the time to get to know your book in that way, just like this comes to here, this connects to there. They'll have their connections and numbers, but when you're just looking at it, it's like, what just happened? There's so much information on this page. Take the time to do that, and it's going to make a lot more sense. You can sort it out so much faster. Just a suggestion. Let's try out another diagram. This is B, and this is dealing with a sloped ceiling. Not a lot different here than what we were just seeing, other than that the ceiling is now sloped. We have an obstruction on the left, and we have the same formula. Check that out. A is greater than or equal to D minus 8 plus B. It's just a little bit different orientation. Notice the pendant sprinkler at the top of the ceiling is following the slope of the ceiling, and then we just plug in our numbers. We look at what is the distance for the obstruction. We subtract 8, and then we add B, and that's going to give me how far out I need to come for A. Now with this sloped ceiling, you can see B is going to be significantly larger, but we have to maintain proportions so that when that sprinkler turns on and it's moving water across along the ceiling, we're not going to have too much of shadow area because of the obstruction. All right, this is the same series. We're on to C. This is the position of a sprinkler to avoid obstructions against the wall, and this is for a residential upright and pendant. In this situation, look at the obstruction. We're less than 30 inches, right? And it says up to 24 inches. If it's up to 24 inches wide, we've got this little box out along the wall, then there is no maximum as to how high that would be above the obstruction. Basically, with the obstruction that close to the wall, within 2 feet or 24 inches, when that head goes off, our shadow area is not enough to be of concern because that obstruction doesn't come way out into the room. So again, 24 inches or less, and we can kind of drop the formulas, drop the tables, and we can just be okay with the placement of that sprinkler head where it needs to be. Moving on to 8.2.5.4, now we're looking at a continuous obstruction to a sidewall sprinkler. Previous to this, we were looking at the pendants and uprights. Now we're looking at sidewall, and we're going to have a similar thing. We're going to look at some tables and some figures. Let's get into this. We've got table 8.2.5.4.2a. Once again, down the left side, we have distance from sidewall sprinkler to the side of the obstruction. This is measured in feet. We can ignore the millimeter thing. And then we have maximum allowable distance of the deflector from the bottom of the obstruction. It's a similar situation, but we have this in inches. Please don't confuse the feet and inches. We got to remember our distance to the obstruction is in feet, and our distance of the deflector above the obstruction is in inches. Check it out though, very similar table, not too complicated. Now, our sprinkler is just on the side. It is a sidewall, right? With this, we have a flat roof. Water's running parallel to the roof. We want that water to fly out, drop down, put out the flame. And we don't want to have a huge shadow area from this obstruction. So we have our distance A, which is in feet, and our distance B, which is above the obstruction. Let's go to the table and try one out. Let's say our distance is 12 feet or more. So I'm looking at 12 feet. Now, interesting, it says or more, because all of these say or more. But you kind of want to go to where's the minimum. You know, if it's between 12 and 13 feet, then I probably ought to use this line. 12 feet or more, and I come across, and that should be 4 inches. So there we have 12 feet on A, and then it can be up above 4 inches. That gives me enough. That water's going to be coming out, and it's going to fall. It's going to come below the obstruction. Not a big deal with this shadow area with the placement of that head, according to that table. Now we get a similar table. This is table B, the position of sprinklers to avoid obstruction along a wall. This is residential sidewall. Look at the left here. We have distance from the sidewall sprinkler to the side of the obstruction, again in feet, and maximum allowable distance of the deflector above the obstruction. As we look at this figure, what's the difference from the other one? Well, real quick, look, the other one was coming out from the sidewall and aiming at the obstruction. Look at this one. We're now along the same wall parallel to that obstruction, and we're going to be spraying out in a different direction. But overall, you know, we use the table the same. So your distance A, let's use an example. Let's say we have 6 feet. If it's 6 feet away from the obstruction, it should be 9 feet above. I meant to say 9 inches above. Thank you. Here we have it 6 feet on A, and then we have our distance of 9 inches above the obstruction. That still gives us enough to where we can get that water spray coming out, not too much of a shadow area, and should be in good shape. Now let's have a look at this figure C for this section, and look at the difference. We have the obstruction on the right, the sidewall sprinkler shooting towards the obstruction on the left, and there's a 30-inch maximum coming down. There's no minimum distance as long as that obstruction is within 30 inches. So if it's not any wider than 30 inches or 30 inches coming down from the roof or ceiling, then it really doesn't matter. We're going to be able to hit it and put it out. Now, if it gets bigger than that, then we got to start really calculating. Here we have figure D. And again, this time, sidewall sprinklers coming out from that side instead of aiming at the obstruction. But this situation, we go back to our same formula. You see that formula, A greater than or equal to D minus 8 inches plus B. So we can calculate that through. All right, now it's your turn to give this a try. Plug these numbers into the formula, pause the video, work it out, see what you get. B equals 5, D equals 22. Let's see what you can do. All right, you've had a minute to figure it out. Let's see what I figure. A is going to be greater than or equal to D, which is 22, minus 8, plus 5. 22 minus 8 is going to give us 14 plus 5. A needs to be greater than or equal to 19 inches. How'd you do? Again, using these, whatever the situation may be, it keeps our proportions such that when that sidewall sprinkler opens up, it's going to be able to come down past the obstruction and put out the fire below. In 8.2.5.5, we come to soffits and wall cabinets. These are some other scenarios of similar to an obstruction. These are parts of the wall that may protrude. A soffit is where they may have a raised ceiling and then it kind of boxes down and you have a lower ceiling. So we got to be conscious of the possible deflections that would cause. The first section says that soffits exceed more than... The first section says that if the soffit exceeds more than 8 inches in width or project from the wall, the sprinkler shall be under the soffit. So where possible, if you have a raised ceiling, you want to have the sprinkler below that. The second section there says sprinklers can be installed in the soffit if the soffit is not more than 12 inches from the wall. If it's too close to the wall, it's not going to do me a lot of good. But if that soffit's out in the room, then it kind of drops down, I can get that sprinkler in the soffit. The third section there says a sidewall sprinkler can be installed over a cabinet if it is 3 feet above the top of the cabinets and the cabinets are not more than 12 inches from the wall. So, I mean, that's kind of limited, but think about most wall-hung cabinets. They're not too much more than 12 inches. Typically, they're a little more shallow than your floor-mounted cabinets. And so as long as that's the case, they can be above 3 feet, whatever your ceiling height is, and it's still going to be all right. 8.2.5.6 gives us a figure here. It shows shadow areas behind sidewall sprinklers in corridors. So now we have a corridor. You can see a couple of sidewall sprinklers. And what this is showing is that you have some shadow areas that are going to be created by these doorways. You know, it kind of recesses in. But in this case, it says, you know, we've got enough coverage here. We don't need to do anything extra as long as that recessed portion of the wall is 2 feet at the most. So if the wall protrudes in a little bit, we could still get the fire out in this sort of a corridor situation with doors. You can imagine this like apartments or something, you know, and the fire sprinklers will be able to put out that hallway. 8.2.5.7 gives us more information about shadow areas, and it states that shadow areas are permitted if the total area is not more than 15 square feet. So have a look at this figure. You've got the sprinkler head, we got the trajectory of the water. There are some shadow areas on either side of these. They look like closets that kind of protrude into the room. But you can calculate that area that's going to be, you know, shadowed. And as long as it's less than 15 square feet, like, it's going to be adequate. The water will still put out the fire without having a direct shot to those smaller areas. Let's talk about 8.2.6 exposed barrel lengths for dry sprinklers. Now, this is a special type of a sprinkler head that can be used to service an area that has low temperatures. We don't want to freeze out there, burst ahead, but at the same time, we can deliver water from inside a warmer temperature space. Have a look at this figure. We have on the left the wet sprinkler pipe. So this has water in it all the time, ready to deliver. But we're going to deliver to a space, maybe this is a warehouse, where the temperatures are lower. And with a lower temperature, we risk freezing. So we have to keep a certain distance. That's X. That's the barrel length. And there's a table that determines that barrel length. You see in example 2 here, it's a similar thing. We have our wet sprinkler system and then a barrel that's going to bring that sprinkler head out into that space that's not going to have the heat that we need to keep it from freezing. So we're going to use these barrels to be able to extend out into that space. The barrels are dry. One more diagram here. We have it coming from above. Let's say we've got wet sprinkler in a line above a ceiling, insulation to keep that envelope, but down below, maybe it's subject to freezing. So we have a barrel length, and the distance X is what we need to figure out. To figure that distance, we go to table 8.2.6.1. There's 2 of these. One of them is A, and this gives us our temperatures in Fahrenheit and our distance in inches. The other table gives us temperatures in Celsius and distance in millimeters. Let's stick with the American way, although it's not as great as metric. As we look at this table on the far left, we see average annual extreme minimum temperature exposed to discharge end of the sprinkler. What that says is, here's a sprinkler, it's sticking out into that space that could freeze. What's the worst it could do? What's the low temperature we could see? And we have a whole range of temperatures that would be exposed to. Now on the other side here, we have 3 columns, and these are divided into different temperatures. We have exposed to 40 degrees, exposed to 50 degrees, and exposed to 60 degrees. These are going to be the inside temperatures of that wet system. We're keeping them warm enough that they won't freeze, 40 being the lowest that we could do with a wet system. But then the warmer it is you'll notice here, the shorter the distance that those barrels need to be. Look at that column on the right, 60 degrees. We have much lower distances for those dry barrels than if we go to 40 degrees on the inside, because we're going to lose heat and we're going to freeze up a lot faster if we're starting at 40. And so we see that difference between what the temperature is on the inside. But in short, you look at your temperature. Let's say it's exposed to 20 degrees and we're delivering from 40 degree space. We'd have to have a 4-inch barrel. All right, let me point out here in 8.2.6.2, it states that the minimum barrel length shall be measured from the face of the fitting to which the dry sprinkler is installed to the inside surface of the insulation, wall, or ceiling leading to the cold space, whichever is closer to the fitting. So we see this in the diagram. We're looking at the distance for X. You need to be aware of what are you measuring to. Look at X over here. We have that wall. There's insulation, and we're measuring from the connection of the wet pipe system to that wall. That's the length for our barrel that we're measuring or finding on that table. We see that over in example 2 here. You have the insulation, and X is the measurement to the insulation, not to the wall. We're always going to like, where does the heated space end? And it's going to end at the insulation. You see the same thing here with the ceiling scenario. We have the wet sprinkler up top, the distance from the connection down to that wall or ceiling that's insulated space, but that's the surface that we're measuring when we're calculating these dry barrel distances. Let's move on to 8.3. This talks about the location of sprinklers and states, in the first section, it states that they're basically to be installed in all areas, like everywhere you should have a sprinkler. Now that would be anywhere that you have interior compartments or rooms. But there are a lot of exceptions that are listed after that here in 8.3. We see from sections 8.3.2 all the way to 8.3.8 listings of places that don't require these fire sprinklers. And here's a summary of these. Clothes and linen closets, pantries not exceeding 24 square feet and surfaced with non-combustible materials, garages and carports, open porches and balconies, attics and penthouse equipment rooms, elevator machine rooms, concealed spaces for ventilation, unheated entrances and exits, as long as there is another entrance and exit, closets in garages, crawl spaces, floor and ceiling spaces that are not heated and used for living, vertical chases, elevator shafts, space not intended for living, and fuel-fired equipment space in an area not occupied. So what do we see in common with all these spaces? These are not spaces where people normally are, or where it's going to be particularly unsafe if a fire breaks out. I mean, it's always unsafe, but let me just point out, the point that we came to for a fire sprinkler system at the beginning of all of this, chapter 1, is to save people's lives, to give them time to get out of that space. People don't hang out in the attic very much. In a carport, you got your car, but you're not there all the time. What we're looking at is like, get into the compartments where people are occupying that space and where they would be at risk if a big fire broke out. And that's why we have all these exceptions. These are spaces that don't need the sprinklers. 8.3.9 specifies that closets used for heating or AC equipment do need sprinklers. It says sprinklers shall be installed in closets for heating or AC equipment, washers and dryers, and water heaters, etc. Obviously, we have these appliances that are using fire, that are using electricity. This is a high potential place for a problem, right? And because of that, even though I might not spend a lot of my time in that mechanical closet, I should have some sort of fire sprinkler to put out a fire there to protect myself in the building. All right, hey, we got through it. We got through chapter 8, sprinkler position and location. We've gone through a lot of detail here. Hopefully you've taken the time to look at your book while we've been doing this to get to know where that information is at. You might not use this a lot in your career, but you might need to know it to pass a state test. So make sure that you understand where that information is in your book and how to look it up. And then you're going to be so much the better when it's time to answer state test questions, when you can use this open book. There still is more in the NFPA 13D. We've got chapter 9, 10, 11, and 12. I'm going to go over that. Join me in the next presentations. I'll see you there.